In this third episode of What's Left, we will explore how the European Union is finally willing to deliver on its social promises.
If we let everything happen as it goes, it's clear who's paying the price.
We have about a decade, that's what scientists tell us, to change dramatically.
We have to fight on many fronts.
La socialdemocracia tiene que liderar esta respuesta social.
How can people continue to be protected when the world is moving so fast?
We need to put a red heart, a social dimension into the Green Deal with concrete policies.
So welcome to Open Days here in the European Parliament with the S&D Group. On the road, on the path to Porto, we're talking about the social summit that is going to happen in Porto later this week, and we're going to be talking about what we would like to see in that Porto Declaration. Joining me today are Pedro Marques, MEP from Portugal. Welcome. You're the S&D Vice President for a strong social and values-based Europe in the world and for communication and policy planning. Welcome.
Thank you.
And Agnes Jongerius, welcome as well. You're the MEP from the Netherlands, coordinator in the Employment and Social Affairs Committee for the S&D Group, so spokesperson for that. Mm-hmm. And you know what? Usually during Open Days, this place is just full of thousands of people, right? And it's, well, of course, COVID, right? That's what's going on. How does it feel, Agnes, in a place like this, thinking that, my gosh, it's empty?
It's a place which really deserves people. Huh?
Yeah.
It deserves, of course, the MEPs, people working for us, but also visitors, because in a way this is the house of all citizens of Europe.
Right.
And due to COVID, all over more than a year, no visitors are allowed.
Yeah. So we're really tired of it, but we got to hang in there, and it's going to clear up. And in a year, Pedro, this place is going to be hopping again for the S&D to have its big event again, as it usually does here in the Parliament, right?
We hope so, of course, and all indicators go into that direction, and that is because Europe really put our strengths together and we joined efforts. And if we are now, for instance, as we are in the vaccination process, is because we joined efforts in terms of research, in terms of getting the vaccines, buying the vaccines, all of that. So there's a lot of Europe in the response to this crisis. I mean, people are obviously fed up of this situation. It's more than 1 year, but still, let us remember that it was a common effort that allowed us to have vaccines in only 1 year, or less than 1 year, when normally it's 10 years. So European citizens should know that we are delivering on something that is critical to the social dimension of Europe, which is health. We are, obviously, this is probably the crisis of a century that we are dealing with. Yeah. But in the end, we are delivering as Europeans in a strong response to an unprecedented crisis.
And health is going to be part of that Porto Declaration. Along with youth, today is really a focus on youth because we will have 3 young progressives joining us as well online very shortly. But what I'd like to start with is, and keep in mind that we are web streamed on the S&D website and on the European Parliament website. Send in your questions over this next hour via Twitter, hashtag EU Social Summit 21 and hashtag social rights. And I would like to start with a video message from Irache Perez Garcia, the S&D president. Please.
Dear friends, once again, the pandemic does not allow for the traditional open doors of the European institutions. I sincerely hope that we can go back to normal as soon as possible, because nothing can replace human contact. However, to celebrate Europe's Day, we Socialists and Democrats are organizing this event around social policies, because our social model is the heart of Europe. It is who we are as Europeans and who we want to be, and this is why we must protect it. We all remember how strong the neoliberal forces were back in 2008, when we had to face the financial crisis. Well, with the COVID-19 pandemic, it has become evident that countries with a strong public service and welfare networks are better equipped to face both the health and economic impact of the crisis. The mood has changed. The truth has become evident, and we have to take this opportunity to advance our progressive agenda. Neoliberal recipes may increase the GDP figures, but they destroy people's life. They increase the gap between rich and poor and condemn the majority of people to hardship and distress. And when injustice and inequality grow, the quality of our democracy is in danger. We Social Democrats have been saying it for many years. Now, a recent Eurobarometer has confirmed it. 9 of 10 Europeans consider a social Europe to be important to them personally. As we are ready to open the conference on the future of Europe to hear about what Europeans want for our future, I think we must start by what Europeans want for their present, a more social Europe. I hope that the exchange today will be very fruitful, and I am confident that the Social Summit in Porto will be the beginning of a new social impetus for the European Union. We count on you. Only together with the unions and with civil society will be able to build the Europe we want.
So that's very interesting, as we just heard from Irache, that survey that 9 out of 10 Europeans do see that that social aspect is so important, because the Schuman Declaration back in 1950 was aimed at welding Europe together so they won't fight anymore. So it's prevented war for 70 years. But there's more to it than that now, and Europeans are demanding that their daily lives be improved by the European Union, and that's why they had this European Pillar on Social Rights that was announced during the Juncker Commission. But where are we now? We've got to move this along. We started in Gothenburg. We're on our way to Porto this week, and people want to see results. There's an S&D declaration called the Porto Agenda for Sustainable Well-Being, calling for child guarantees, youth guarantees, minimum wage, better working conditions. This is what the S&D would like to see in that from your declaration, Agnes, and that declaration has been out for about a week now. How much of that declaration would you like to see, can we see, in the Porto Declaration that the heads of state are to sign later this week?
And this is still a work in progress, I must say. So at the moment we are commenting on texts and we are trying to put amendments on the table. And I think what's quite extraordinary, what Prime Minister Costa had done, because this is the declaration of the...
hold that up to the camera. There it is.
And this is the declaration of the Gothenburg Summit.
Okay.
And it reads as the European dream. So it's all there. But from that moment, we have been pleading for an action plan, because this is a dream, but people want to have a reality. And I think
20 principles, right?
20 principles around housing, access to good schools,
cutting poverty,
fighting poverty. Everyone is entitled to affordable health care. So everything is inside. And I think what's very interesting that the Portuguese put the follow-up on top of their agenda, and that they have invited not only heads of states and the European Parliament, but also social partners, so employers, trade unions and social NGOs to the table. And the declaration of that group is getting better and better every day.
Right. So you're optimistic to some extent.
I'm optimistic about the outcome of the 7th. But now it's about what are the heads of states on the 8th of May committing to, because it's important to have a broad support, and Irache already told, 9 out of 10 Europeans are supporting the social agenda. But now we need the signature of my Prime Minister Rutte. And I'm not doubting Costa, but
Antonio is on board.
Antonio is on board, but
it's his party, right?
we need all of them, and that's still a lot of arm wrestling to be done.
But Pedro, how much could we see targets with teeth?
I mean, the targets are there at the action plan from the Commission.
Right.
But now the point is that we have had already targets in the past, but we need the instruments, we need the teeth, we need legislation where legislation is to be in place, minimum salaries, rights of platform workers, to give you another example, and we would like to see a bit more on legislation. And let me be clear, if it's not possible to go further in terms of legislation in the areas in which our group would like to see, at least we want an effective method of coordination. And that's why we need the governments to pledge to the objectives. I mean, it's not just about setting a good target for employment or a good target for training or even for reduction of poverty. It has to be about national commitment and then a good benchmarking between the member states. And in the past, we had the open method of coordination for employment policies that can and should be used in an effective manner when we cannot go further to legislation. But, I mean, it can't be just beautiful objectives.
Yeah.
On child poverty, we need action. We can use the European Social Fund for sure to support policies toward child poverty. We can do more in terms of policies, probably from member states, in terms of concrete instruments to reduce directly poverty of the families with children.
Yeah, because you want to see poverty cut in half.
Yeah, that's right. So, I mean, it can't be just, as I say, beautiful words or beautiful objectives. We have to have concrete measures, either at the European level or at the national level, but with strong coordination. And in the end, for me, and for this group, it's unacceptable that we are always saying, no, but this is not to the European level, there is the issue of subsidiarity. No, let us be clear. We cannot achieve this kind of bold objectives without a European approach to reduction of poverty or to decent employment. That's why we are pledging, for instance, for the directive on the platform workers' rights.
Okay.
I mean, we are in the middle of this new economy, new society that you referred to at the beginning, this situation that makes our parliament being closed like this. We are using the platforms for almost anything.
Right.
I mean, we are communicating through the platforms, but at the same time, there are workers whose rights are not decent. The people that are delivering food to our houses or books or anything that we buy, we need fair treatment to these workers. They must have their rights enforced. So that's something that we pledge as a group. I mean, it's a decent society, the one that assures that somebody that works for us, and if there are decent rights, jobs for people at the stores, there must be also for the people that are delivering these goods at my house. That's unacceptable any other way.
This is where I'd like to bring in the young progressives, the three youth that we're connecting with during this hour, and also with the rest of you listening. Please send in your questions and comments via Twitter. Can I turn first to Pilar Roig Atreva? You are among one of the young progressives. Do you hear me, Pilar?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Hi, mucho gusto. Nice to see you.
Thank you. Nice to see you too.
Now, we discussed a bit earlier about this, you and I together, about the youth guarantee. That's a very important aspect of what the declaration should include. Talk about that. I mean, it is supposed to guarantee that youth have some kind of job or education if they're out of school or a job for at least 4 months. How do you see that?
Yes, indeed. Well, as we all know, younger generations have been one of the most affected groups during this pandemic, but also since the economic recession. So it is not an easy context that we're navigating in. And right now, we are also seeing some impacts of that with some brain drain from member states. So we are leaving our member states to go to other countries, because even though our home countries are training us, we can't find well-paid jobs or decent jobs. So we're leaving to find jobs in other countries, and myself included. I'm based in Brussels right now. And this is also happening within member states. So young people are not finding jobs in the rural areas especially, and are requiring to go to urban areas. So in the end, all of this is being exacerbated by the pandemic. And we are seeing a lot of inequalities across member states. For example, I think The lowest level of youth unemployment is around 10%, but one of the highest ones in Spain is almost 40%. And what is the European Union doing now?
So
So
what
one of the
targets,
instruments is,
Pilar, what
yes.
targets would you like to see in that declaration, and targets perhaps with teeth?
Well, as we were discussing before, there are targets in national recovery plans on climate goals and also on digital goals. But there are not many targets on, for example, cutting youth unemployment by half. And this could be one of the things that member states could commit to in Porto. Because in the end, we are the future of Europe, and we are the ones who are going to make Europe a better place to live in the future.
And by cutting that unemployment, perhaps more opportunity will prevent that brain drain from various countries. Let me pass to Francisco Rebollo, if I may. Francisco, do you hear me?
Yes. Hello. Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me.
Tell us about digital work. Can you tell us that is a main concern, not only for youth, of course. You know, the idea about the right to disconnect, not to have to be working round the clock. That's probably an important thing in your mind, right?
Well, I think that we have a different paradigm right now. It kind of feels like a space shuttle, if I may, because we have a limited amount of space where, okay, this is where I work, this is where I eat, this is where I do the workout, if it wasn't allowed to go running. But before, while you could take the work from home, now the work is home. And it could be on us to set a difference and to put boundaries. But I would definitely love to see in the Porto Declaration that it's enforceable, that it takes part of the new digital rights, so we can have a working life balance, let's say.
And about the fact that you have to provide your own kit, you have to have your own equipment to do this, right? That's a challenge as well, isn't it?
Yeah, we're
tell us
actually
your personal experience. Tell us about that.
Well, while I was working, for example, last year in Brussels, I had to use my computer for most of the office stuff, and I had to replace it after a while. And you know, this depreciation that they call it wasn't into account on my contract. I just think that we are not adapted to the transition. We have been adapting in a way, but we should definitely have enforceable rights to so when it happens again, we're better prepared, and it doesn't take it on the youth.
Yeah. So what would you tell us? What in your dream of vision? What do you want to see in that declaration, the Porto Declaration on social?
Well, the right to disconnect should be enforced in the Porto Social Summit, or at least aimed to a bigger scope of European politics. I think I would love to see that as a young European, especially working under that condition where it doesn't seem that days end longer. In a way, we should have these kind of boundaries.
Okay, what about a minimum wage?
Well, I think the minimum wage, as Mr. Marquez has just said briefly, the fight for a decent level hasn't finished, and if anything, it has increased. We have seen the disparity during the pandemic, where collectives, some collectives have been more exposed. For example, the conditionality that affects women in the workforce has been increased. The partiality, all these elements that have played a role, but they have been the gap has been increased during the pandemic, and the only way we have to reinforce any kind of universal protection is through a minimum wage. So I think nowadays is the perfect moment to ensure that it allow us to live with some dignity while we try to make a career by ourselves, and with special incidents for women.
Okay, I want to come back to you, Francisco and Pilar. Let's talk to Unai Gomez Fernandez. Unai, do you hear me? Yeah, there you are.
Hello, Chris.
Okay. Hi. Can you tell us about that aspect about trainees and interns and that sort of internships without end, unpaid? How should we address that in the Porto Declaration?
Yes, of course. Unfortunately, that's the reality that many young students live nowadays. Most of the internships are unpaid, and the few ones that are paid are highly competitive. I can give you a personal example that unfortunately I had to live through last year. At a European institution, there was an application for a paid traineeship, that had only 6 official places, and over 2,000 applications were sent. This is to say, only like 0.3% of the applicants were admitted. Unfortunately, this is the situation we have to see on a daily basis from our side. There is no regulation on which are the standards of these trainees or these interns. Most of them are unpaid, and unfortunately, in COVID times, those traineeships, those paid internships are even further reduced, particularly in the private sector. So I personally would like to see a complete ban on these unpaid internships at the Porto Summit. How much money should it be given to these interns? Well, I leave that to the MEPs, but I would personally propose a percentage of the minimum wage of that member state. We certainly need to continue learning. We certainly need that first working experience, but we need guarantees and social rights and working rights.
How do you see that on the committee there here in the Parliament?
We in the European Parliament, we are already for a long time in favor of a ban on unpaid internship.
Right.
My colleague from Italy, Brando Benefei, has been very active. He has been the president of the Young European Socialists. Before he entered the European Parliament. He's very active, but there is indeed on our side a total commitment, and we're trying to push, let's say, when we are talking about the funding through ESF or other European projects to squeeze in this ban on unpaid internships. Not always easy, but I think it's a right fight because it's either really training during school time, but more often it's the start of your career. So you finished your education, and then you are expected to work on a voluntary basis just to spice up your CV. I think that's not fair.
Maybe for a certain period, but it shouldn't go on and on and on. Right?
But I think only during your education, and even then, if you are having an internship, it also takes your clothing. You need to have equipment. You need to. It's costing you, and I think this is a very rightful pledge.
Pedro, let me ask you because you're on the Committee on Regional Development. How should regional development be addressed by this Porto Declaration?
One of the critical aspects that should be addressed was referred in one of the questions is exactly the consequences, for instance, of the transitions, the green transition on rural areas. I mean, we will have to decarbonize transports, to give an example, but in some areas of our countries, I mean, the alternative to individual transport is basically none in these rural areas. So you need, if you want to electrify the individual cars, these persons from these regions, which normally or a lot of them come from low-income families, it will be more difficult for them to pay for expensive electric cars. So you need to support these people in the rural areas. Also, the peripheral areas in Europe will be more affected by the fact that we need to have I would say, price the carbon, for instance, from air transport or maritime transport. So you need to take in account that the transition, it creates a toll on this, I would say, outermost or peripheral regions or rural regions, and you need to address that. We did it in part with the Just Transition Fund, which I was a shadow rapporteur for. The paradigm of Just Transition Fund that was more or less set up for all regions and for all countries, but more specifically to address the issue of the transition from coal. I mean, we need it for the broader policies now within the green transition. I would say that it's clearer for the green transition in terms of its regional impact, For the digital transition, it's different impact. It's more, I would say, between cohorts, age cohorts, but there are still social dimensions to be addressed in the digital transition. There are probably more opportunities to the youngsters in the digital transition, I would say. But for instance, the elder workers are at risk in the digital transition. So you need to train them so that they are not left behind. To give another example.
It has to be fair for workers of all ages, and of course also the young who are getting started too. It's difficult. Pilar, do you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Let me ask you about this. Now, I spoke, I think, at our last event with Thea Jark of ETUC, the ETUC Youth Committee, European Trade Union Confederation, and they have a report called "The Future of Work." It mentions a number of things, including, as we were just talking about, just transition in fighting climate change. How would you, as a youth, see that just transition for you, that it somehow, that just transition be just for youth as well?
Well, I think a lot of people have heard of the European Green Deal, and it certainly is going to be one of the programs that is going to determine the growth in the European Union for the next years, and that therefore involves us because we are the ones who are going to work for it too. So I think it would be also creating spaces for dialogue between youth and other stakeholders, even with institutions, so that we can be involved in that process. Because I think younger generations are very much concerned about climate goals, and we want to work on them, and not only through strikes, but also through cooperation with institutions, local, maybe a community-based approach that also can give back to the community later. So I think the younger generations are open to all of these strategies and initiatives that the European Union is also developing, but that can also be further developed and discussed in Porto.
So there is that link between the green transition and the just transition that you and for youth that it'd be just for youth, that they not wind up becoming a bunch of yellow vests protesting the transition, right? I guess.
Rather not, huh? And Pinar is right. It's about their future more than my future. But I think it's important to say, to underline what Pinar is saying, that young people want to be involved in the policy making and in the transition because they value this transition very much. But she was also right in her earlier statement when saying for the European funds and the recovery funds, there are much more, let's say, digital and green conditionalities than there are social conditionalities.
Yeah, you want to work more of that into that.
And I think our common battle is to have indeed more social conditionalities inside, so that indeed we are now all talking about leave no one behind, and that's a very good slogan.
Yep.
But it should also be a reality. And as Pinar was saying, I'm coming from the Netherlands. I also see highly educated Spanish young people working in our logistics and distribution, and more often than not being exploited by Dutch employers. So I think if we now have a young generation which is higher educated than any generation before them,
right,
and still are throwing them on a labor market where they have to work under the minimum wage, and employers are still able to deduct from their salaries because they provide for a bed. I think this is a common fight, because I think I'm very much in favor of labor mobility. But I think labor mobility should not be the same as exploitation of young people.
Right.
And I think we have a common fight to fight for a just and decent and green and digital future, but also a future where you're not forced to move 3-4 countries and still being exploited.
Let me mention just a couple of other things that are in the S&D declaration ahead of Porto that I think is quite interesting, along with cutting the number of people in poverty in half, the child guarantee, the right to disconnect, digital work rights. It talks about closing the investment gap, Pedro, in social infrastructure, that there's a gap of nearly 200 billion euros a year. But how are you going to pay for that? Now, you're on that tax, tax subcommittee. What about a digital tax?
Yes, that's exactly the way to go. I mean, we need smarter fiscal rules, because the current fiscal rules, I mean, I call them the old fiscal rules because they are not even enforced at this moment because of the crisis, and we don't want to go back to those old fiscal rules because they were not suitable even for the pre-crisis, much alone if you talk about the post-crisis. So we need new fiscal rules that allow for green and social investment. But obviously, as you said, we need to finance the recovery and this social and green investment. So we do need new resources, new revenues.
Right.
So digital taxation is certainly at the table. Corporate taxation in general for the big multinationals must come to the table. And it's discussed at this moment at the OECD level with a strong push by President Biden, fortunately. And also...
Yeah, because you have to do this on a global level, otherwise it's not going to work.
Right. But fortunately now the US are on our side on that. I mean, Europe has been leading on the matter, and now the US are also on our side. I mean, even green taxation will generate resources, because when I said just a few minutes ago that we have to put a price on carbon emissions, that will generate resources through the ETS and the ETD that we can explain in another time. But I mean, it will generate resources, and the matter is that you should kind of earmark part of those resources to deal with the social consequences of the transition.
Yes.
That's what we pledged for. That's what, I mean, when Agnes was saying, leave no one behind, I mean, we know that there is a risk because of the green transition, as I said, that people in the rural regions, elder workers, etc., they might be at risk. So let us earmark part of these new revenues. At the same time, you are creating a fairer taxation, a fairer tax system, but at the same time, you are directing immediately the money where it should go to the low-income households, to address housing. I mean, the housing costs, they are high, and they will be higher with the renovation wave. The energy will be more expensive, the one that does not come from renewable energies. Aviation or maritime transport probably will be more expensive. But, I mean, if you don't want Gilets jaunes in all Europe, you need to address immediately from the beginning the consequences of this green transition into the low-income households, into those people that were protesting in the streets of France.
Right.
Franz Timmermans, our vice president and our champion for the Green Deal, Franz has said very correctly, either you have a just transition or there won't be a transition at all, because people won't accept it.
Right.
I mean, that's the issue, and that's exactly what Pilar was pledging for when she spoke a few minutes ago.
Exactly. Let me turn to Francisco Rebollo about this aspect. About digital taxation. What's your feeling on that? Is there probably a lot of support for that among youth, right?
Well, I mean, they are providing services as well, but they're gaining benefits. If you look, for example, of how Uber works, they do not own the vehicles, but they exploit them, and they make money out of that. And the same goes with Netflix and the content in an extent. So we should encourage actually that there's a level playing field and that they pay their taxes, because it's the only way to ensure that the people who, say, work under them have right conditions, that they contribute to society as part of the economic tissue. So I think it's fundamental that in this digital transition, everybody abides by the same rules, in a sense. Okay.
Let me ask one of these questions that we've received. Keep sending them in via Twitter. It is, how do you intend to make the targets binding in practice, Agnes?
Now, here I think we could also use the example of the climate targets.
Right.
When everyone came together 6 years ago in Paris, there was a general agreement on the targets as a whole, and then it was up to member states and the European Union to say, okay, we are part of this global deal, and this is how we are going to deliver upon this target. So I think it's important to get a signature of heads of states under the global targets of the action plan of Porto. And that don't do the trick automatically, but then we have a common horizon together where we all can see if a legislative proposal is doing the trick or should be more ambitious. So I think targets should, in a way, function as the pushing power of new policy proposals at the European level or at the national level, and sometimes even on the regional level. For instance, one of the issues also addressed in this Gothenburg Declaration is the issue of homelessness. And you see in a lot of countries that is the mayors of the big cities who took the issue on board, not waiting till their capitals are moving forward, because they are in a way seeing this problem in their streets. So my idea is have global targets, and then if you have targets, let's say for the year 2030, you can then later on have the debate on the legislative proposals which should do the trick for these targets.
Pedro, do you see it that way, or just noting that Portugal has the EU presidency right now? That's where you're from. We're going to Porto. What do you hear from home about the possibility that some of these aspects in the declaration could be binding? Is there any chance of binding in there?
For now, what we expect, of course, from the informal council is a pledge from the heads of state on the targets. If they do that, it's still a declaration from the informal council, but it must be a political compromise from all the heads of state and government. And this is not easy, because we know that too many member states are still saying this is national competence, we don't want Europe messing up with these competencies. But as I said, either we go against poverty, even on global targets for employment, either we go at European level or we will not achieve it. If we don't coordinate, we will not achieve it. Agnes was pledging correctly for legislation in many of these areas. That is what we want. If we don't get that there in some of the areas, at least I think a very strong open method of coordination has to be in place. And, let us be clear, with a bit of naming and shaming, that it didn't hurt in the past in some situations, like in taxation. In taxation, it has been very effective.
The transparency is a motivator, right?
Yes, that's right. Some countries don't like to be called offshore, and so they change some practices. So maybe in terms of social dimension, at a certain point, something will have also to come to the table, because some member states, they just can't lag behind on the targets. That's unacceptable.
Because let me point this out, like you just mentioned this about the pushback from some countries. There is a letter by 11 countries, signed by 11 countries, saying that they want, quote, they want us to respect national authority over policy making in such areas as labor and employment, pensions, education, child care. Those are all those social aspects. They're anticipating what's going to go on in that social summit. And how does the S&D respond to that?
No, I think I took note of this letter. I also took note because the Prime Minister of my country was one of the signatories. So I find it interesting. But on the other hand, I think it's also clear there is a push, like Irakse has already mentioned, a push from people in Europe.
9 out of 10.
9 out of 10. And this is not only in all the other member states than this 11. It's in all member states. And I think this is indeed the nitty-gritty work to be done towards the summit or in the aftermath of the summit, I think we are convinced that there should be new policies on the table. And we're also working on policies around minimum wage and the right to disconnect and healthy environment and the pay transparency for men and women. But I think in the end, this position, let it all be at the national level.
Yeah.
They cannot maintain.
It doesn't work that way.
It doesn't work that way.
And even for them, just a second on this. I mean, we are here representing the European citizens who voted for us directly. And I have a pledge from 9 out of 10 European citizens saying put social dimension as your priority. But also these prime ministers and presidents of government, are they comfortable with the idea that they come one time a month here to Brussels, to the Council, to discuss things, whatever important things they are, but not the thing that the citizens really want to be a priority of Europe? That's certainly unacceptable also for them.
Yeah.
People are saying that they want European policy to focus on the social dimension. So, I mean, it's for them and for us a responsibility to go into the direction of the priority of the citizens.
I want to sound out our three young progressives, starting with Pilar. Pilar, on this, the S&D Declaration says, quote, the Porto Agenda is a milestone moment for Europe to take the essential next steps towards a viable and sustainable union. Now, if you take that to the extreme, that is actually suggesting to me that if we don't have a strong social pillar, as they say, social aspect, maybe the EU in the long run might not survive. It has to be sustainable, and to be sustainable, you have to have that social aspect. And for youth, because it's you in the future who's going to determine whether this whole game continues. How do you feel about that?
I feel to an extent, as you said, it is like that, because of course no one was expecting that we were going to be hit by a pandemic, and it has revealed a lot of weaknesses in the system and also opportunities that we can move forward then. So I think it is very important to keep that in mind, because we want to prevent. We don't want to cure anymore. Sometimes we say that the European Union or some governments are more reactive than preventive in some sense. In this case, I think it is better to go with this strong declaration and these strong objectives, because if not, if we point out to a very low threshold, then we will not be ambitious enough. So I think it is good that we are ambitious in this sense.
Because I guess there are probably a lot of youth thinking, well, so what's in it for me? If the EU does not address my concerns, does not give me a youth guarantee, does not give me these opportunities and these guarantees and protections that I need to thrive in the future, why should I care about the EU? Why should I want it? I mean, what about Brexit? Brexit happened in part because there were youth who voted for Brexit. To leave the EU, right?
Yes, but then by the same token, we all know people who now are unemployed. We all know friends who are not finding an internship or anything, and we want that to change. And as I said before, we are the ones who are committed to change Europe for the better. And this pandemic, I think, has also highlighted that, which is the ambition that we need to change, and we need to make commitments. And as both MEPs were saying, we need concrete action from member states. And now that member states are also seeing the light at the end of the tunnel with the recovery plans, it's also an opportunity to put at the same level of importance the social objectives.
Francisco Rebollo, and back to you. We've been talking with you about minimum wage, equal pay for equal work. And in that context, how do you see this as a milestone moment? The Porto Summit, the social summit, as being a milestone moment for the EU? Is it almost existential in the long run?
Well, I don't know if existential, but Pilar has described it. In times of crisis, there comes a possibility to adapt. And I think being too ambitious is not a problem, because we actually need to face challenges that we haven't seen before, and the social affectation of this crisis is probably one of the biggest and the most necessary to address. I think that young people need to feel that Europe support not only the exclusive competences and the technical idea that comes through the media, but that actually being European, taking part in the same polity, makes a difference. And I think it can be a milestone because it can unify our sense of belonging under a social umbrella. How to arrive there, it might be more complicated. Maybe that's the question for Pedro or Agnes, but we definitely need to achieve that sense of belonging to be a generation that is more compromised with Europe.
Okay. All right. I am told I have a question in. Yes, of course, Unai. I want to ask you the same thing. Is this how much is this a milestone moment for you, this summit in Portugal?
It's one of the few opportunities we have to recover the welfare state that has been lost over the last decades. I don't know if the last chance to save it or not. Hopefully, it will not. But unfortunately, in the last years, as Irache Garrin at the beginning, there have been a variety of neoliberal policies that had our social welfare, our social rights, and eventually our access to social justice. And of course, for young people, like, we need to see that our future will be social, and indeed a crucial opportunity, as I was saying, hopefully not the last one, to regain this welfare state, this social contract we had in the past. So yes, definitely very important.
I think there's another angle I wanted to examine with you, Unai, is on minority rights and discrimination. How much should that be addressed in the Porto Declaration?
I think it should be in. You know, in the last days we have seen a Latvian paramedic was killed because of it very recently. Unfortunately, this is not an isolated case. In the previous, another person in Belgium was killed because of his sexual orientation. Pedro was talking at the beginning about a new society, this new opportunity given by COVID. Let's try not to inherit old problems such as, of course, this is all about the social shield we need. People, I think that I'm speaking of everyone, this should definitely be included in the Porto Summit, the profit, but not just as a decision by itself, but with teeth, some kind of regulation, binding targets, instruments, something that can make the life of cities bearable in European states.
I think it's especially important during this hour to hear from youth, because there has to be that passion from youth demanding action in this Porto Declaration. Your arguments for this, for integrating youth concerns in here. Pilar, there's one aspect that we haven't really talked about yet too much that is in the S&D Declaration, that talks about affordable housing. There needs to be affordable housing. What's the aspect there for youth? Youth are struggling, and it is difficult for youth to find affordable housing, right?
Definitely. That is one of the main problems, I think, that we are facing right now. Not only youth, but also other groups of society and vulnerable groups.
Oh, we're a little bit okay. I think I hear you. Continue. Oh, okay, we froze. Maybe I can jump over to Francisco. Can you talk about that before we get back to Pilar?
Okay.
I think she's back. Well, just
are you back, Pilar? Yeah, go ahead, Pilar. Continue. Sorry.
Okay. Now I think. Can you hear me well?
Yeah, I hear you fine now. Try it again. Affordable housing.
Okay. Yes, I was saying that it is indeed a very important issue, because an equal and just society, it is also based on social services. And if we don't have strong social services, we are losing that pillar of just basic living. And it is important that this is also addressed in Porto, because we all know now people that have been have not been able to pay the rent, or people from the healthcare sector that have been severely affected, and also people working in nursing homes. So those jobs and also this investment is very important that member states keep in mind for the future.
Francisco, can you add to that? Can you tell us a story about that?
Well, I can tell you the story of the outrageous prices I've had to pay as a tenant, but I can also underline that, well, I think most of us feel like as socialists because we understand there's a link in living conditions and how we put work at the center of life. The fact that most millennials, most of our generation believe that having a mortgage is almost like a unicorn, that we will probably be moving from place to place, trying to get upgrades in our living conditions, but we're playing in a different scenario than our parents did, and we should need some aids to be able to have at least the same opportunities for the people who maybe want to own a house, or that they don't have to face outrageous situations with tenants with no guarantees, that it doesn't make life, working life, let's say, easier if you have to face that as well.
Pilar, can I come back to you? How much are you concerned? Pilar is cut off. I'm so sorry. Well, okay. Let me go back to Unai then. Unai, you hear me? Are you with us? Okay, maybe. Well, Francisco. Oh, sorry, Unai. You hear me? Okay, good. How much are you concerned that because of the COVID crisis, and if we're not successful in really having a substantive Porto Declaration signed by the heads of state, that we risk seeing a lost generation as a result?
I believe that we will unfortunately continue with the inertia in advance. So these policies, particularly social, will be carried on. And the same goes for green transition, digital transition, the just transition. Unfortunately, I don't know if all political parties represented at the European Parliament are as convinced or as willing as the Socialists and Democrats to continue in that sense. If they aren't, they must be convinced. They must be brought into the. We cannot be, as Agnes was before, the generation that is best prepared, best educated, and the first generation to live worse than their parents, worse living conditions, worse housing conditions, salary conditions. This is not acceptable. We should really work to change this and not to let this happen.
Francisco, can you add to that? Lost generation, how much do you fear that?
Well, there are some days that I feel it a lot, but I think we also, having that preparation, being able to at least use that global mobility in our advantage, still I think we should be vigilant. Like all the challenges that you and I just mentioned form part of our reality. And the way to face them is recognizing that more cohesion could actually help us being united against those kind of challenges, because individualism in that sense is not going to take us further. We've seen that. So probably that's the biggest challenge.
Yeah. Francisco, thanks. Pedro, cohesion, that raises that idea again about regional development, right? I mean, how much should that be a factor? How much are you worried about that possibility of a lost generation?
Well, I mean, we should be worried because, I mean, we are talking with youngsters, Europeans, that they believe in Europe, they have experienced Europe, probably they went through Erasmus or something, they were in Brussels, but let us think about the millions of youngsters that they didn't even have the chance to get full education, for instance, or they only get a very low-paid job in the end of secondary school or something like that. There are millions of Europeans in that situation. Why? Because for I would say for 2 decades or something like that, there was a kind of a dualism in Europe in which these youngsters were the low protected. no labor rights practically for the youngsters. The unpaid internships, all of that for almost 2 decades was the norm, was the paradigm. Fortunately, I think that there was kind of a reaction to that a few years ago before the pandemic. I tend to think that the 2 to 3 years before the pandemic, we were starting to change things a bit with the work of the European Parliament, with examples of some socialist governments like mine in Portugal, to give an example. We were showing that there is an alternative. We were raising minimum salaries. We were putting an end to those unpaid internships. We were creating better labor conditions. And the economy was growing in those countries like mine. So we were showing, indeed, to the liberals that there was an alternative. This week, Financial Times was saying the left is winning the debate of ideas. And this came at the Financial Times. And this means that, I mean, we are proving now, particularly within this crisis, in which we are again in a huge danger of losing many of those youngsters because of loss of capacity to create jobs because of the crisis. But we are showing again, we are proving again that the welfare state, that quality public services are indeed the only alternative. If we didn't create in Europe quality health, public health in our countries, how would we be in the reaction to this crisis, to this pandemic? I mean, it made a huge difference that we have good public health in Europe, in most of the countries, to handle this crisis. So, I mean, we are indeed showing that public investment, social investment, can make a difference. And at this moment, in which there is obviously a huge risk because of the loss of capacity of the economy to create jobs now, there's again a risk for those youngsters. And we must do whatever we can to indeed do not lose this generation. We need all their capacity in their countries, if possible, certainly in Europe, but if possible in their countries, creating welfare again in their countries. I mean, I think there is, again, a consensus, or it is recreated at this moment, is being recreated, a consensus that welfare state delivers even on the side of the economy, even on the side of the economy.
Well, Pedro, we look forward to being in Porto with you.
Yes, we'll surely be together.
And we're going to have a big discussion with many, many figures, many big names for the S&D in Porto on the eve of the summit. That's going to be on this Thursday, so be sure to watch us then as well. Agnes, also some final comments here before we go to show a couple of videos, which I think is quite. There's one called "The Shower Story" about the right to disconnect. It reminds me of a Hitchcock. Hang on.
Yeah, hang on. No, I'd like to mention that we could also win this battle. So we have won the battle of ideas, but like already mentioned, even in the United States, they are now investing massively in public services. And Joe Biden is saying, I'm using my federal contracts to take care that no one working for a federal contract is earning less than $15 an hour. And it's more and more known that the old liberal idea that let's grow the economic cake and then everyone will have a bigger pie, piece of the pie.
Raise the boats.
Raise the boat. That doesn't do the trick. And the pandemic has clearly shown that. There are inequalities. There are inequalities between member states, in member states, and indeed also between generations. And I think if we are really listening to the signs of the time, people pleading for social Europe. We have allies in the trade unions. We have allies in the NGOs. We have allies in some governments which are showing the right way forward.
Right.
Let's use this time. Let's listen to the signs of the time and make use of indeed steering the boat in a different direction.
Agnes.
Especially for young people.
Yes. Yes, Agnes, thank you so much. Pedro as well, and to Pilar, Francisco, and Unai. Thank you so much for watching. We will see you later this week in Porto. So this discussion will continue, and continue to tweet anything you heard or would like to comment on. Make sure you tweet hashtag EU Social Summit 21 and hashtag social rights. And now, stay tuned. We're going to show you a couple of videos before we sign off. So see you soon.
Boss? Giuseppe. Giuseppe! Boss?